Ready?
Yep.
All right. We have someone new with us today, so let's go around once with introductions. Steve, why don't you begin?
Hello. Tell me your name again.
Anucha?
Anucha.
Did I pronounce it correctly? Yeah.
Okay.
A-N-U.
A-N-U-C-H-A?
J-A.
Anucha. Okay. I'm SteveStrain. I have been working with the CCRG for 8 years, I think, or almost. 2009. 2008 I took the course in fall of 2008 that Stan taught, and then I've been working here. My initial interest and continuing interest is to the application of the LIDA model to the development of a medical agent, a medical diagnosis agent. I'm a physician in a past life. I went to medical school. I completed a family medicine residency. And I'm not currently practicing medicine, but I am doing research and teaching. And since working with Stan, my home department is biomedical engineering. But since working with Stan, I've become interested in cognition in general, and what is mind and how the LIDA model attempts to address that question are very interesting to me. I'm also interested in brain rhythms as they pertain to cognition and our model in particular. And that's good.
Okay. My name is Sean Kugley, and I've been with the group for about 5 years now. I'm a graduate student in computer science, and I also work over at FedEx as a software architect. Been working with Stan for a while now on research ideas. Right now I've been mainly focused on mental imagery, some of the work. I don't know if you know the authors, but Lawrence Barcelow is one of the ones that we've talked about a lot. He's a psychologist. I don't know what your background is exactly yet, so it's probably a waste of time. But yeah, so yeah, I enjoy attending these meetings and being a part of the group, and that's about all I can say about myself.
My name is Tammy. I'm his girlfriend and everybody's fan. That's pretty much all I got.
And we like you too.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Social media director?
Yes,
Yeah.
I am social media director, although right now that has not taken
Yeah,
off because we've had a few
Yeah.
moments lately, but I'm hoping to coordinate and
Yeah, you
organize
missed the
that a
meeting
little
where we
bit better.
fired you, but it's okay.
No.
Is that a Van Gogh? Is that a Van Gogh on your T-shirt?
Sort of. It's Firefly meets Van Gogh.
Oh.
Oh, okay.
So it is.
Cool.
Yes, A Starry Night meets Firefly. So I'm a geek.
I don't need a lot of introductions, we know each other, but
How do you guys know one another?
actually I became friends with her brother before. He's an undergrad student, so we just saw each other one day and got to know him, and then through him I know her. We've been on trips together.
Can you hear our introductions?
But I've been here 6 years. I did my master's
Type in the chat
here,
window if you like.
and then I'm doing my PhD. In LIDA model, I've been working mostly in the perceptual side of things. That was up until the beginning of my PhD, and then during my PhD I've been involved with some other things like self-system in LIDA, and I've been trying to implement deliberation in LIDA, which is the ongoing project for me in LIDA.
My name is Anuja, and I'm an undergrad in computer science, and I just started studying the LIDA model, so like I don't know much about it, and this is my first time here.
Welcome aboard.
Well, and I'm Paul Mushon. I'm a retired physician who audited one of Stan's courses in AI, and I'm sort of an auditor to this group. Not active, but I listen and learn what I can.
Oh, you're active. You give presentations.
Talk. And occasionally give a talk. Yeah. All right, Steve, go for it.
Okay. Well, do we want to let Bob introduce himself a little bit?
Oh, yes.
And also, Anucha, if she likes, I'd be glad to hear something from her.
You didn't hear from her?
Oh, I must have been distracted. Did she? Okay. All right, sorry. Okay, Bob, would you like to say anything about yourself?
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's see, I'm 70, so I'm a youngster, I believe, compared to Stan.
Oh, yes. Quite so.
I don't have children quite as old as you, but almost.
So my daughter is pregnant, so that's good news. I started off with my interest in cognitive neuroscience when I was an undergrad at MIT about 50 plus years ago, and I took courses from Marvin Minsky and Jerry Lettvin. And although my major was in math, my real interest was exactly cognitive neuroscience. And the way I've always talked about it is, number one, how does the brain work? And number two, can you do it in silicon? And in the 50 years since then, I went to med school. I was in an MD PhD program in neuroscience, got my MD and didn't finish the PhD part at that time. And my PhD 10 years later was in artificial intelligence, and I led a group that was involved in trying to extract medical knowledge from large clinical databases for about 10 years at Stanford. And then when my grants ran out, I went back into clinical practice for 20 years until age 60. 10 years ago, I retired, and then since then, I've been back at Stanford. My formal honorary position is a research affiliate in the psych department. That's with Jay McClelland and a lot of the connectionist types there. But I hang out in the computer science department where I was formerly a principal investigator, and also at the med school, listening to a lot of neurobiology. So that's my background. And so again, it's how does the brain work, and can you do it in silicon?
Wow, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Glad you could join us. All right, so now we get started?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And we are recording, okay. All right, so continuing a series of talks that began in February of last year. And it's sort of kind of gotten fuzzy how many talks there were, so I went and looked and did a count, and this is number 10.
Wow.
So anyway, what I want to do first is show a little video that one of you, oh, and Bob, let me, in case that it doesn't track very well, I'm going to give you the website in the chat window. All right, actually I've already got it open, so let me see if it's going to give me trouble. It behaves a lot. Okay, so Paul sent me the link to this video. Oh boy. Well, yeah, that is an awe, isn't it? Let me try another browser. It played at home. I don't understand why it won't play now.
Tammy just said it's not her fault. It's not that she's messing with the electronics or
Yes,
just by her presence.
for those who don't know, Tammy emits
So
electromagnetic
pulse.
radiation at a frequency that is highly destructive to
Yes.
high-tech devices.
Yeah.
It's taking this time for a browser to load or something else?
For a browser tab to load.
Oh,
And in fact,
it's the site that's loading, not your browser.
it's YouTube, a browser tab.
Yeah, got it.
We may or may not be able to do this. I will just give it a few more minutes of trying, and if it fails, then so much for the videos.
But it would fail more quickly before.
Oh, when Adobe Connect is running, it often really slows down other things. Quite irritating. Good heavens. Why don't we just move along and maybe we can come back to that and maybe it will be loaded. So, all right, let's just move on to review quickly about Gibson. He did his undergraduate work at Princeton, his PhD was at Princeton. He worked in the Army Air Force during World War II and after, trying to study the way vision affected the skill of aircraft pilots. And then he was at Cornell from 1950 until his premature death of pancreatic cancer. He was 75, but was really his most significant work, Ecological Approach to Visual Perception, was published a few months before his death. So far it's received 30,000 citations, and it critiques the mainstream theory. I should critiques mainstream theory. I should have said theories, because there's more than one mainstream theory. But he critiques these theories for excessive reliance on reductionist models, Newtonian mechanics, Euclidean geometry, and neurophysiology. He doesn't discount them. He thinks they're they shouldn't be the first starting point for a theory of perception. He critiques an excessive conception of perception as a passive rather than an active process, just a system awaiting input and then responding only when the input arrives. He critiques the effect that non-ecological constraints on experimental subjects have had, fixing the eye, fixing the head, using two-dimensional stimuli, pictures, rather than ecologically valid or ecologically natural stimuli. And he also philosophically believes that there's a meaning implicit in ecological systems that's due to the fact that an environment and an organism co-evolve. And an environment is not just a Cartesian space that is occupied by physical objects, but it is an interactive dynamical system in which the organism and the matter and energy around it are in a constant dialogue of sorts.
Steve, Anuja, what we do here is to feel free to come in with questions. Go ahead.
Okay, Gibson has some remedies for these excesses, and I'm going to just give you an outline of some of the things that he does, and then we'll expand this outline in the slides below. And we've seen this before, but I'm going to try to review it fairly quickly so that we can move forward, since it's been so many months since our last Gibson talk. So perspective shifts alternative ways of describing the environment, of describing the light available. We're going to talk about visual perception here, but he would have a similar shift for describing the energy available for perception in any sensory modality. And then also the concept of vision as a perceptual system rather than just a channel for light to activate the brain. You know, another important concept that we've you know, looked at in some detail in previous talks is the concept of invariance, and then finally affordances. So let's start by just reviewing the way his alternative description of the environment goes. The traditional way of describing an environment would be in terms of Cartesian coordinates and kind of matter that's made of atoms. And while this is, you know, he doesn't contest that this is a valid theory, he states that it's problematic as a basis for perception. And he wants to focus on interactions that are affecting the light that is available for perception. And when you start with Newtonian mechanics and radiation physics, then you can get a distorted view, in his opinion. So here's a little quote that I think summarizes his position here, and I think that's the best way to review it. "The terrestrial world is mostly made of surfaces, not bodies in space. And these surfaces often flow or undergo stretching, squeezing, bending, and breaking in ways of enormous mechanical complexity. So different, in fact, are environmental motions from those studied by Isaac Newton, that it is best to think of them as changes in structure rather than changes in position of elementary bodies, changes of form rather than of point locations, or changes in the layout rather than motions in the usual meaning of the term." So those of us that have been trained in physics or mechanics or engineering in the 20th century will have some preconceptions that make his shift in perspective a little surprising, but in my estimation, it's quite important and very useful. Now, so that's in describing the environment. He then also has an alternative way of describing the light that's available for perception. "Let us try to distinguish light as physical energy, light as stimulus for vision, and light as information for perception." So light as physical energy is the model given by electromagnetism. The classical theory of electromagnetism will suffice for light at scales encountered in daily life. You know, and it involves a radiation of electromagnetic energy from a point source. Then light as a stimulus for vision is light impinging upon the retinal receptors, changing the conformation of a rhodopsin molecule and triggering a series of intracellular events that result in an action potential which propagates to the brain. And then light as information for perception is where Gibson wants to focus. And he describes light based on illumination, which is his way of describing the diffuse, multiply reflected field of ambient light that converges on each point in an environment, and rather than the radiative view, which emphasizes single rays of light diverging from a point source in a Cartesian space. Go ahead.
He's going a little too fast for me.
Sorry.
Description of light based on illumination. Okay, I'm happy with the first one, rather than radiation. Go ahead.
Okay, so the idea is that the typical way we think about light as rays, you know, take for freshman physics or second year physics, I can't remember which year it's taught in, but undergraduate physics teaches optics on the basis of rays of light. And this goes back to Newton, actually, I believe, perhaps before, but he was certainly very less well known for optics, but that was an important contribution of his. Another quote at the bottom of this slide: ambient light makes available information about reflecting surfaces, whereas radiant light can at most transmit information about the atoms from which it comes. Now, illuminative light is composed of a very complex interaction of many kinds of radiation that have bounced multiple times off of different surfaces. And so that you know, information about the original atom from which it came is lost. But Gibson proposes that there is structure in the light, and he defines something called the optic array. And I'm first going to show a picture and then describe a little more. We've seen this this diagram before. It's from Gibson's book, and it shows a person in two positions, one seated and one standing. And the optic array is the light that comes from every direction to the point at which the person's visual, person's visual apparatus is located. And notice that
Wait, say that again, though.
the light.
Light comes from every direction.
Yes. Yes. Including, imagine that if the person's head were not there. You see the circle that's in the location of the person's face? There are lines that are coming from the back of the circle that are converging. Now the person's head limits the light that would come there if the head was not there. But Gibson says that's light from the person's head.
Well, you're getting ahead of me. How is light coming from the various corners?
That's illumination. I mean, look at this room. Light is coming from these locations to a point.
So what you're saying is that light somehow reflects up there and then back out in my direction.
And in ambient light,
Yeah, it does.
the field is filled with varying, intensities of.
And so it also comes from the back of the eye.
Well, yes. The position of the head changes the. Yes, I mean that would be part of the optic array. It's not going to be part of the part that's used for perception, but there's something in I learned it in physics. It's called a solid angle.
Yeah.
And the entire solid angle is what an optic array is at any point is the entire solid angle, because you can't. Okay, and so this is just describing the way the optic array changes when a person in a scene moves from sitting to standing. Now, so let's look at some of the. What happened? Oh goodness! It can't advance the slide. Let's see what's going on here. I wonder if Bob's able to stay connected, if it's doing this with PowerPoint, what it must be doing with the audio. Bob, while we're waiting, do you want to tell us if you can hear us? Turn your microphone on. I've got my phone on in case he calls. I've got it on vibrate.
amazing.
Never been that bad before. Let's assume that we're having some memory issues and close some things. Okay, let me close this. Okay, so while I'm trying to close some things, I can go ahead and talk about this. So, the optic array is a complete description of the ambient light converging on a single point. Oh boy. I pressed escape about a minute ago, and it's just now processing that key. Okay, so I'm going to continue to talk about what was on that slide. The ambient light that converges on a single point, and I had it said careful Renee. What that is just a reminder for me to mention that Gibson is very careful to specify that when he talks about a point, he is not talking about in the sense of a Cartesian coordinate in space. He's talking about a location in an environment that could be occupied by the visual apparatus of an organism. And he finds it very important to point out this difference. And from my perspective, it grounds his theory in something that's very, very tied to the ecology that happens.
Is it something like an intersection?
Say again.
Is the point something like an intersection where things?
It's a location. It doesn't have to be, I mean, the Euclidean definition of a point is that which has no part. You know, and we think in terms, especially, you know, I was trained in physics, think of in terms of a dimensionless, you know, location. It isn't specified what the extent of this location is, the size or the shape. You know, I mean, it's a region. It's a region that's suitable for.
Why don't you try the task manager and kill some processes from there?
Yeah. Certainly don't want to end the talk before we even get out of the first 25% of the review section. Waiting for the control ability to process. It's got to be I've got too much stuff open and I'm running out of memory or something, but it doesn't do this. It's never done this. It's never been done this bad before. It's Tammy.
It's got to be something.
Tammy, why don't you move to the other side of the room and see if that. No, just
Another
kidding.
building on campus.
I can try to zap it.
What if we wrap her in aluminum foil?
Yeah, exactly. Chuck would approve.
Yes. Good grief.
Well,
The Chrome
looks
is
like it's just connect. That's doing the.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
I want to do this manually because if I. Oh, my goodness, that's. Something's very, very wrong. Okay. See what else I can.
Who are the most vocal opponents of Gibson? Do we have like a spectral form of one of those in here sabotaging your talk?
It could be, it could be maybe somebody went to the ancient one and learned.
Exactly, with the cabotage and some astral form in here. Just out of curiosity, when you're mentioning a thing about the extent of this point as being defined, would the extent define how much of the ambient light is being used for perception? I mean, what would extent dictate or affect in terms of perception of the point?
I'm not sure. And if we hadn't been solved, I probably wouldn't have gone on about that. I think, wait a second, there's already a copy of this running. Okay. All right, okay. Hello, Bob? Bob, can you hear me? Hello, Bob?
Still there.
Okay, 6:36, all right.
Oh, any second?
Bob, yeah, you were just calling and then you hung up. We had a lot of technical difficulty for a moment, but I think we're okay now. Are you? Yes, okay, that makes sense that it would be. It says he says the audio stream was disrupted. Bob, feel free at any point to turn on your microphone and interject for any reason. Don't worry, just as if you were here physically. Okay, I'm going to get back to it here. Do I already have one playing? No. Okay, so I'll just return. All right. So if you imagine looking at the inner surface of a basketball viewed from its center, a night sky viewed from the Earth, and this is quite different than a pixel map, which has a artificial border. There is a limit to our field of view, but it's certainly never as regular as that of a pixel map. Anyway, it's just food for thought. Let's continue. The next.
In what sense is it not regular as a pixel map?
Pixel map is, for instance, an 8 by 8,
Yeah.
square or rectangular grid.
Yeah, I'm well aware what a pixel map is.
Right, and the borders of our field of vision are perhaps goggle-shaped.
So it's roundish, goggle-shaped, rather than rectangular.
Yes, and it's also not equivalently defined, at the limits as at the center. There's a number of things ecologically about a pixel map that are, they don't invalidate a pixel map, but they're not often thought about. So in terms of perceptual systems, and I think